Hello, everybody. I'm so excited here on this Friday evening to talk to you all about Game Week 11. And as always, Mr. Big Ben Dinnery is here with us as well. I'm trying to figure out what Slavcho's message is. Whilst I do that, I'm going to introduce you to the big man himself. How are you doing today, Ben?
Dear Mac, all good, my friend. As always, I do love. It's not a live stream. I was going to say deadline, but it's a live stream tonight. It was deadline last week. Things are a lot more tranquil and calm when we don't have a Friday night fixture to mess things up. So hopefully, we'll not get too many things wrong. We'll get through this one nice and smooth. Lots of questions. Happy to answer all of those. So keep firing them in. And I'm going to steal a line from you, Jason. Please remember we go through these in alphabetical order. So try and tee up those questions as we get to each individual team. That just helps in terms of people dipping in and out because we can't bookmark those for the record. So
Yeah.
there you go.
No, that's lovely, Ben.
How did I do, Jay?
You did a
All right.
fantastic job and
Thanks.
explained it nice and succinctly. I was very impressed there. You're doing
Thanks.
a stellar job. And just as always, before we go into the broadcast, I remind people, if you don't have your question answered, you can always head over to the Premier Injuries website. We've got everything, as Ben said, alphabetically lined up. And also, Ben, actually, before we start, you had quite an interesting analysis on Orico as well. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, the guys, there was actually some information that was produced from Orlando City, the MLS team out in America, currently flying high, sitting second top of that Eastern Conference division, Open Cup winners from 2022. And we've seen a post, I think was from a member of the backroom staff, one of the strengthening conditioning or the head of medical, and they spoke about how they're integrating the technology behind the scenes to one, enhance and improve performance of the players and try to sort of jump on any particular trends and also, identify when those players are maybe becoming a little bit fatigued or, going back to the old Arsene Wenger days when players are maybe dipping into that red zone. And that's helping these backroom staff making these informed decisions with regards to starts and minutes and loading and offloading. We heard from Mikel Arteta, indeed, talking about Martin Odegaard and him carrying a little bit of a problem, which has been a loading issue. So he's offloaded him for the last couple of games. And that's what this technology actually does. It's an interface, a dashboard that allows you to glean these insights, make those informed decisions, and the availability. And that's key. We talk about availability, and availability is the best ability. So the best players in the world have those high availability rates. You're thinking about the Mo Salahs of this world, the Lionel Messi's, the Cristiano Ronaldo's, how, we'll cover those today in terms of the teams. We have massive numbers of players on the sidelines at the moment. So, maybe if anybody is watching or they know of any teams that could benefit from these types of technologies, then I'm sure the guys at Oracle would be more than happy to have a little bit of a chat.
And the reason why I wanted to bring it up as well is because obviously Newcastle work with Orico, and you just see from their availability last year. Obviously we're going to chat about their individual team news, but I think it's a fascinating story of maybe the reason why a lot of people didn't expect them to get a Champions League space last season, but they did because of their incredible availability. What was that amazing stat in terms of their availability for their first 11?
Yeah, so in terms of those teams across the top 5 European leagues, they had 9 players who actually completed 75% or more of every Premier League minute. So every domestic minute, they had at least 9 players available, outfield players at that, by the way, which was unprecedented. If you look across, those major leagues in European football, some teams are lucky if you maybe get 5 or even 6. So to have 9 and have that nucleus, that core where you can build that momentum, those players, are playing in sync with each other, and you're not chopping and changes. It was a great headache for Eddie Howe to have in terms of those selection decisions, because more often than not he had a full complement of players to choose from. this season, and we've seen that with Newcastle and with Brighton. Things have changed somewhat, and that's the impact of European football and playing those high profile matches 2 and 3 times a week, which it becomes a little bit of a vicious circle when you're having to maybe risk players if you haven't got maybe the depth of the squad that you want. Your players are maybe risked because you don't have the players in certain positions, and unfortunately we have seen a couple of setbacks for predominantly those two teams as they get used to the rigors of like I say, of European football.
So just to summarise there, check out Oracle. They've got loads of really cool publications on their website as well. They're very open with the kind of research that they do. So I would check it out. It's something that I really enjoy with my nerdy obsession with football stats and injury analysis. But after that little introduction there, we're going to get on to the injury news. Bournemouth up first, Ben. What is the latest for the Cherries?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the Cherry squad is pretty much as you were. They had a decent result. Oh, sorry, not a decent result, a decent performance midweek, should I say, against Liverpool. They did obviously, unfortunately, exit that EFL Cup, but they were promising signs and they did show a little bit of fight. And that shows maybe, we talked about Areola, potentially his job was on the line, but, they got their first win on the board last time out. And for that reason, I don't expect too many changes. I have noticed that there will be at least one. That's the goalkeeping situation. We do know that Neto picked up an injury in training. That's an ankle problem. That's going to keep him out until after the international break. So that's going to be at least one change. Another question mark potentially, if anybody is interested at all, would be Alex Scott. We know he arrived at the club with that knee problem in the summer. He's been thrown in at the deep end, really has played a high lot of minutes. It is a fairly quick turnaround. So if anybody was going to drop out and be rotated, Alex Scott would be one of those players that I would be slightly concerned over. Although he does offer a lot in terms of those set piece capabilities and his delivery.
Yes, and they'll need it against Man City this weekend. I don't really give them much of a hope, but we shall see. Arsenal up next, and we've discussed it for a little bit. Faltering performances, but then they banged 5 against Sheffield United. But I won't be forgetting how they're still not playing great at the moment. But what's the injury news? Is there any boost to the team?
Yeah, so team news ahead of the Dinnery derby, as it's going to be coined for this weekend.
Love that.
Mikel Arteta kept his cards very close to his chest, really coy in terms of availability. As we've heard in recent weeks, he spoke about the possibility of players returning from injury. Well, what I would suggest that all of that really is just a load of crap. The long and the short of it, because if you look at those players who are injured as such, we know that Timber was going to be miss a majority of this campaign. Thomas Partey, that's a muscle problem. The expectation is that he won't be back until December. There are also concerns over Emile Smith-Rowe. That's a knee problem as well. We're talking weeks. That's undefined because that's still being evaluated. And also Gabriel Jesus, that's a hamstring problem. And be lucky if you've seen him before the international break. So you can instantly rule those 4 players out. The one player that he was possibly referring to was who I mentioned at the head of the show. That was Martin Ødegaard. He started on the bench in the last 2. Again, a niggling loading problem has been the issue with that, but he came off the bench. He did score against West Ham. He has been feeling a lot better, so that's why I'm throwing him back into that Arsenal starting 11. Big game on Tyneside. St James's Park will be jumping, and I'm excited to see an game.
Yeah, I'm very worried about the Dinnery, as you called it, derby. I'm not looking forward to this one because you guys will make it very hard. You're hard to play through. And also, we've been playing very conservatively this season. And obviously, last season, we really struggled to break you down with an even more, I'll say it, kind of boring style of football. I don't know where the goals will come from. However, I think that you and your team have included maybe a way that goals will come from. You've kind of dropped the Jorginho Rice double pivot, which at times was good to help the defence out, and you brought in Fabio Vieira. Is that just because you think tactically Arteta will change things up?
Yeah, I mean, this one isn't locked in, I suppose, 100%. I think he will just look to freshen that team a little bit. He was obviously very disappointed with the performance midweek, although he shouldered a lot of that blame. Maybe the expectation levels were a little bit too high, and a change of football and philosophy and of styles. So yeah. I'm not 100% locked in with that. Like I say, Vieira is the one that is most at risk of dropping out of this starting lineup. Everybody else, I think, should be pretty much locked and loaded.
And Gabriel at centre back again. Do you think he'll be all right?
Yeah, look, I think it's just a case of more of managing minutes, trying to avoid any of those. Look, and he did face a little bit of a backlash for the exiting of this EFL Cup, but it's when you're carrying a big squad and you've got players on the fringes of that team, it's a fine balancing act between one, keeping those players happy, but then also giving that bit of game time to gain that sharpness. So should they need to come in and fill for injuries and suspensions, they're going to be in a position where they can hit the ground running. And that's a difficulty. And we've seen teams and Mikel Arteta make lots of changes in the past, and they've went out and got the results. Look at Newcastle and I think we made 8 changes midweek. We come off the result. If we had have went the other way, then Eddie Howe would have faced a bit of a backlash. So, yeah, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't sometimes.
I'll probably sound a bit odd here, but I'm happy that we're out of the Carabao Cup. I can't stand it as a cup. I think it's such a waste of time. Big waste of resources as well. And like you said, yes, you can get the odd squad player, but I think generally, it's just kind of a bit of a ridiculous morale kind of drainer to a lot of teams when really every other European nation only has one domestic cup. I don't know why we have two.
Money, Jason. It's always the money.
Sorry. Silly question. It is always the money. Aston Villa up next. What is the latest for the Villains?
Yeah, I expect pretty much this team to be locked in. The only position I really see up for grabs is maybe on that left-hand side with Leon Bailey. I thought he was a little bit unfortunate not to start last week with Zaniolo getting the nod. But Bailey's had a couple of decent goals and appearances from the bench. I don't think he started in the Premier League since August. So we're talking, the best part of 2.5 months, maybe in and around that. So big call from Unai Emery if he does. But I think everybody else in that team, Alex Moreno is on the fringes of a possible return, but he doesn't oust Luca Digne at this point.
Yes, because Digne is playing very well at the moment.
Yeah.
So Slavcho says you have one cup and one Mickey Mouse Cup. Definitely agree with that. Unless you win the Carabao Cup, then it's definitely a very good, high-quality cup that everybody else hates upon. Brentford up next. The Bees, they'll be looking to push on after some decent performances in recent games. But it's a tough one this weekend. What is the latest with the injury news?
Yeah, so we expect to, Thomas Frank to revert back to a 4-3-3 home game against West Ham. He did mention that Neil Maupay was a little bit unfortunate to drop out of that starting 11 last weekend. We throw him back in there. And generally, the squad is pretty much fit and healthy. Ben Mee on the fringes of that team will be pushing, but, if I know he is held in very high regard, but it would take some shift in Pinnock and Collins at this moment in time, and that would be a big call. So, like I say, it's not for me just at this moment. I think it's a 4-3-3 with a good 9, at least 9 of those players locked in, fairly confident.
And you've kind of switched back to the classic 4-3-3. Last weekend was obviously the 5-3-2. Is that correct? You kind of do that when it's a big team versus a smaller team. So you class West Ham as maybe one of the smaller teams that Brentford, I guess, feel that they can play against rather than have to kind of defend against almost.
Also, the game is at home, at the G-Tech Stadium. So I think you expect a more open and expansive. And typically when, teams are playing away from home, they will have that more defensive sort of setup. We will see West Ham go predominantly with that 4-2-3-1, although they do have a couple of suspensions this week that may force David Moyes' hands in slightly tweaking that formation. So it could be, and I'm not sure, but there's nothing to say that they might go with a 4-3-3 themselves, West Ham, in match up with Brentford.
And I guess it depends which West Ham turns up as well, because they've been inconsistent this season. It's something that you've discussed this week. Just kind of looking at it, what do you think that the outcome is going to be then? Is it Brentford with their kind of slightly better underlying data, slightly better performances, or are West Ham going to give them a tough time in this kind of London derby?
It's a tough call. Yeah, they had been on a little bit of a downward spiral, West Ham in recent weeks, but then they bounced back, and yes, Arsenal made changes, but it was still a strong Arsenal lineup. They do have a little bit of depth to their team these days in their squad, so West Ham still had to go out and do a job. The loss of Paquetá will be big. It will be felt most definitely. But that opens the doors for Kudos to come in as well. I'm going to have to sit on the fence, Jason, and I'm going to go with an entertaining 2-2 draw.
Well, at least it's entertaining. 2-2 draw, I'll take, just so long as Mbeumo is involved with the goals. Up next, Brighton. And again, it's another difficult one to call, their fixture this weekend. But is the injury news going to be a booster to them?
Tariq Lamptey is back in contention. Now, he's missed the last 4 games, picked up that injury in the Europa League away at Marseille. Now, whether Roberto De Zerbi believes he's fit enough and ready to start, I think maybe he will look at that European game on Thursday with that in mind, thinking that Lamptey certainly can't start both, or the following game in round 12. So that remains to be seen. A little bit disappointing that Pervis Estupiñán did not recover as hoped. There was even talk that he could have made game week 10, but failed to make this. Roberto De Zerbi has been a bit of a nightmare in terms of that starting 11. Lots of changes. The injuries certainly do help in trying to predict that starting 11, but there are still 1 or 2 positions up for grabs with this one. So, like I say, this was one that maybe could be tweaked as well. Buonetti is a player who could come in on the right hand side ahead of Grinya. Dahoud maybe for Gilmore is another option, and certainly Webster hasn't been locked in at centre back, and there are no guarantees over him either. He could potentially switch things up to a 3-5-2 even as well, with Igo Julio making that back 3 if you wanted to push the likes of maybe Veltman and a Tariq Lamptey on that left hand side if you believed he was fit enough to start.
And this is something that you covered just now in your The Athletic kind of you do your Q&A over there, so if people do listening to this also have an Athletic account, you can jump on that with Ben each game week. But Adringa came up quite a bit because of the injuries, like you said, in the team. But you've kind of mentioned there, you've mentioned on here, you're not too certain that he'll definitely keep that space. I see a lot of FPL people moving towards him as a cheap asset, and he does have that appeal because obviously Brighton are very attacking. But would you say that's actually quite a risky move?
I think he's one of those players where, given the outlay, you're happy to take a punt and you're happy to take that gamble on the understanding that, is he going to be locked into that starting lineup for the Seagulls week in and week out? Probably not, because even though they have got injuries, then Roberto De Zerbi, isn't shy to make changes. We've seen the likes of, I mentioned, Buonetti go up there. We ought to see, Pascal Gross has played on that right-hand side as well. There's a possibility he could change things up with Adam Lallana, in that, attacking 3 or even attacking 4 as well. So the only player that I typically or really see nailed down is that sort would be Karel Matoma. The rest, maybe Evan Ferguson in the absence of Danny Welbeck, although João Pedro can lead the line as well if they go maybe with a 3-4-3, which we have seen previously. So Adringa, look, great. It's cheap. The upside is great, but you've always got to accept that these budget players in the types of teams that they're involved in, particularly those who are playing maybe 3 games a week, then, there's always going to be a risk that they could be rotated out.
Yes, so let's move from Brighton on to Burnley. Again, quite often not much interest in this, just any headliners.
The disappointing news is Lyle Foster hasn't recovered from illness. Vincent Kompany wouldn't go into any specifics, but it looks as if this setback could keep him out until after the international break, which is a big blow.
And obviously Byers back in the team, which I think is quite good for a lot of FPL fans because they have him as a backup quite often in their teams. Chelsea up next, and they have an outstanding performance against Arsenal the week before, and then last week were absolutely dire against Brentford. They created chances, they had opportunities to score, and they just couldn't put them away. The owners and the manager must be absolutely exacerbated with the likes of Nicholas Jackson, who just, they're really good opportunities, just not putting them away. Which Chelsea's going to turn up against Spurs this weekend, Ben?
Only time will tell. I'm hoping the good Chelsea, and hoping of the Ben Dinnery, Nicholas Jackson will be on the score sheet. He wouldn't have been top of my shopping list and looking at a search for strikers, but with limited alternatives available, I had to opt for Nicholas Jackson. So I could do with at least a brace for him. He has, some making up for me to do. Of course, I had a decent result in the AFL Cup midweek, and they face Newcastle in the quarterfinals. So if we're, to go on and do something in that competition again, then nobody can question that we've got there the easy way. That would be United, City, and of course now Chelsea. So yeah, we'll see. The game on Monday night makes things a lot easier in terms of looking at that right back spot. Reece James, we've seen start his first game in a while, midweek. If that had been a Saturday game, then maybe, that recovery time, then maybe I may have been, slightly not inclined to put him in there. But because, it's Monday night, there's more than enough. And I think Mauricio Pochettino starts him. Mudryk is another one who could be added to the squad, and also Armando Broja as well. They won't be too far away, but I don't expect either to start.
Benchmarks has mentioned James Maddison. He says he's not trained today. Obviously, we'll discuss that when we get to the Spurs. They cannot keep playing Jackson, can they? Says Chris Chapman. What do you think on that, Ben? You've obviously included him there. Is he only in the side because he's the only fit striker, or could Palmer play there, and like you said, maybe Mudryk come into the team? What do you think? Does Nicholas Jackson and the owners of him as an FPL asset have to be looking over their shoulders and thinking, actually he's not performing well, actually he might not be in the team?
Exactly that. I think there's definitely a confidence issue there. I think he's basically performing around about half of his expected goals, just under 4, I think 3.95. He's got himself, 2, but yeah, he should be doing a lot better in this team. And we have seen the likes of Cole Palmer, Raheem Sterling leading that Chelsea front line. But I think Mauricio Pochettino will, give him that time, allow him to maybe grow into that role. He has been carrying a little bit of an injury. He had surgery on his wrist during the international break. That has been affected him. So he is improving in terms of his sharpness. And like I say, that I'm hoping as a Nicholas Jackson owner that we're going to see, some better performances and ultimately some returns from the Chelsea striker. But like I say, the return of Armando Broja, that'll put a little bit of pressure on him. And, there are other options. I don't think Mauricio Pochettino, he's certainly not afraid to change things up if things aren't necessarily going his way.
And I don't think he should be either with the current play style. Again, on the Athletic, a lot of interest in Odsonne Edouard. Obviously, Crystal Palace have a lovely fixture this game week. It is away, but it is against Burnley. Is there positive news that one of their creative players is going to return? Am I right in hearing that Eze might be back in the squad?
Eze has had a week back on the training pitches with the squad, come through all of those sessions absolutely fine. So yes, he will be in the matchday squad for the Eagles, providing there hasn't been any setbacks between Thursday and the game kicks off. So that's great news in terms of his availability, and it's going to be a big boost for Crystal Palace. I see this as an opportunity for maybe Roy Hodgson to introduce him from the bench. Although, nothing surprises me with Roy. And if he was to come in from the start, then it's probably the likes of maybe Will Hughes that would miss out from that team, unless Royce tweaked his formation and maybe went with a 4-3-3, and maybe Jeffrey Sloop would be the other player missing out, as he's just returning from injury. So, but I just think it's a little bit too soon to throw him in for a start. Michael Elise as well is also back on the training pitches and not too far away. So again, that's a bit of a double boost, but I think it'll be after the international break, probably before Elise is involved.
Yeah, I think the thing with Crystal Palace is there's a lot of potential there. They've got some really good young players. It's just, I guess, the squad depth for them, and quite unlucky as well that Elise and Eze both got injured around similar times, and so they've really been kind of lacking that cutting edge, that ability to cut through defences, create in the final third, to get the ball to somebody like Odsonne Edouard. So maybe in the coming weeks we'll see a little bit of a return in the interest of Crystal Palace, because defensively they've been doing all right. And as always, Roy Hodgson just seems to work miracles with whatever team he's with, but especially if they are the Eagles. Now, Everton are one that, they're gathering a little bit of interest. They're moving towards being a slightly more consistent side. And one of the big reasons is the return of star man Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He has performed quite well in the last 5 game weeks. They scored 8 of their whole 10 goals this season, almost matching their XG for the first time in a long while. It's definitely a lot down to Calvert-Lewin, but the team has gelled quite a bit as well. What is the kind of latest in terms of their injury news, though?
Yeah, we have Ashley Young returning from suspension. Of course, he was involved in the AFL Cup midweek. He started in that game and actually scored. That tends me to sort of lean towards the fact that Nathan Patterson will keep his place at right back. The expectation was that maybe we would have seen Patterson start midweek if Young had a realistic shout. Of course, there's no guarantees with that, but I just think maybe starting a 38-year-old in consecutive games with such a quick turnaround would be risky, especially off the back of last week's performance as well, where Everton got another win under the belt. I think I'm right in saying it's 5 wins and 7 across all competitions. So they are starting to get that little bit momentum. The last time Everton won 2 games in a week, the third game, which everybody had written down as at home banker, ended up being a coupon buster. Can you remember which game that was, Jason, off the top of your head?
Got absolutely no clue. Newcastle?
That was a defeat at home to Luton Town, 2-1. So let's hope we don't get a repeat of that for the Evertonians, who will be looking, like I say, to make it 3 wins in a week.
It's an interesting game as well, because Brighton have not been at their best, whereas Everton have kind of grown a little bit more into the season. You'd say based on the quality of the squad, you'd probably edge towards Brighton. But I think a huge problem, which people maybe haven't picked up on just yet, is Brighton are leaking so many goals. They're one of the worst defences in the league this season, and it's not just like a fluke underperformance. They are conceding a lot of high quality chances in terms of their XG as well. Do you think that maybe Everton, with their, I guess, combative play style, they've got a lot of physicality in there as well as directness? There is some sort of press in there that Sean Dyche does. It's a hard style to play against, especially when they're playing quite well. Could they give problems to Brighton and maybe again be a coupon buster? Because I think people are really backing Brighton as this is almost an easy game for them.
I wouldn't be surprised if Everton, is it a shock? Given the momentum that Everton have got, those confidence levels, Brighton are a little bit fragile at this moment, like you say, conceding a lot of goals. I think, is it fifth bottom in terms of goals against? And yes, we all talk about Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but also let's not forget that Jack Harrison has come in there and he's been fantastic since, recovering from surgery on his hip. And, he came from Leeds, worked very hard on training pitches. And you talk about that high energy, that high press, a player that's going to close down, and he's going to, set an example on the pitch. And Jack Harrison has been doing that. So he's another player, that Evertonians, could be a big player for them this season. And listen, if I was to have an outsider bet of the weekend, then Everton would be my shout.
And, with the Jack Harrison situation, I liked him a lot at Leeds. I thought he was a fantastic player. Like you said there, he has all the hallmarks of a really high quality midfielder, just hard-working, great passer, great creator. They've done well there, Everton, to get him, and I think he'll link up quite nicely with DCL. In terms of DCL, actually, we did have a question. Would you take a punt on him, Ben, as a differential to stay fit as well? Do you think he's now pushed through and his availability, basically, as you said there, the best ability is the availability? Does he have that ability?
Time will tell. What I would say is I've been very impressed with how Sean Dyche and his backroom staff have managed the situation, particularly when you're going through bad times at the club. The temptation is always going to be there to risk your best players and hope that they come through and maybe get you a goal. In the face of adversity, Sean Dyche has always maintained that, Dominic Calvert-Lewin had to be right. We've seen him involved in behind closed doors games. We've seen him working hard with the first team. And yet, he wasn't getting those minutes with Everton. The goal was always to bring him back and to ensure that in the short term, medium term, and long term. So I think they've done everything that they possibly can to try and make Calvert-Lewin robust enough, but there are no guarantees. Is he somebody that I would look to pick? Absolutely. Somebody that I've been given some serious consideration to, but given the limitations around how I can pick my fantasy team, I'd struggled, and that's the only reason why Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't in my team.
But you could say he's Dominic D.
Yeah, absolutely, but it created problems elsewhere in different positions that I couldn't get, adequate cover or cover that I would like. So, and then of course, if I have to make a change like that, I have to wait till I get 2 free transfers if I don't want to take a hint. And I've had a couple of injuries. It's just hassle. So maybe next time I wild card, Dominic Calvert-Lewin is definitely on my radar.
Now we move to Fulham. What is the latest for them?
I've went for a couple of changes, maybe a little bit of a gamble here. The midfield spot in that double pivot, I've went with Sasa Lukic, but Harrison Reed. There's not much between those two players, so those two players will be vying. On the right-hand side, I've went with Harry Wilson. I thought he had done well. Midweek gets the nod. There's a couple of potential starters in that position, but we've seen in recent times it would be Deco Reed. But I just think Wilson maybe gets the benefit. Iwobi over Andres Pereira, who I don't think has quite hit those dizzy heights since recovering from ankle surgery. And the big talking point will be in attack. We've seen Raul Jimenez, who, looks a pale shadow of the player, pre-injury, that horrific head injury. We've then seen sort of glimpses from Carlos Vinicius, a couple of goals, but again, I don't think he's the answers. And we've heard from Marco Silva talk about Muniz and his the prospects of him playing and how much he has impressed. So again, got a goal midweek, so I am rewarding him with a start.
What do you think the story is going to be in this game, though? Is it going to be a ball draw because both teams massively underperformed their XG? Man United 3 under their XG. Or is this going to be a game defined by bad defences because Fulham are near the bottom? Manchester United are not much better. So Fulham have 18.8 XG conceded data. and Manchester United are quite close by, for a lot of people there, with 17.7, and they're both equal with goals conceded this season. What's going to come to the fore here? Is it going to be like the immovable force or the unstoppable object of poor defences?
I don't think Manchester United can afford to go out and play for the draw, or certainly Erik ten Hag can't. So we'll see how much of the backing of the players he has to go out and try and grind something. I really think they need to go on the front foot, play attractive, attacking, offensive football. In theory and on paper, they've got a lot of those players with those attributes. So if that's the case, then again, it wouldn't surprise me to see a fairly entertaining game with a few goals in this one. The emphasis is certainly going to be on Manchester United here. And if they are playing on the front foot, then, with the absence of Casemiro, then maybe there's one or two holes in that United backline and that defensive unit. And maybe Fulham can capitalise in that early kickoff at Craven Cottage.
I hope so. Long may it continue the bad problems for the Red Devils. And hopefully that bad luck spills over to Tottenham soon as well. Liverpool up next. The Reds, obviously we do have to mention the terrible, sad situation with Luis Diaz. We hope that gets sorted as soon as possible. And obviously that is affecting his selection choices, but Jurgen Klopp had, I guess, positive news that he wants to be in the squad, that he would like to be in there, but you've not put him in the team. I guess mentally it must be absolutely awful for him at the moment, and they've got to manage that situation. But is there any other news in the team that people need to be aware of?
Left-hand side of midfield, the return of Curtis Jones from a 3-match suspension. He's one that could maybe compete with Gravenberch for that start. Otherwise, like I say, I think it pretty much picks itself, this team. We have Diego Jota, Luis Diaz. You're right, he has returned to the training pitches. He's had a couple of sessions now with the team. Jurgen Klopp said, when he's with the boys, he's great. What goes on behind closed doors, is only he knows. But what he did say was the player himself doesn't look like he's had much sleep. He looks very tired, fatigued. So, like I say, even if he was to make that match day squad, then I certainly wouldn't expect to start.
No, and we hope that there's a positive resolution to it all in the near future. Now, continuing with Luton, again, a team with not much interest, I guess. Do you want to say anything, or shall we pass on through?
I'll keep it short and sweet. Rob Edwards isn't expecting anybody back from injury. Ross Barkley has impressed following his return from a hamstring problem, so we have him back and starting in that Hatters team. But look, it's going to be a big task for them this weekend to get anything from the game. I don't hold much hope, unfortunately.
No, neither do I. Continuing over to Manchester City. Now, obviously, there's a lot of eyes on this. And somebody's pointed out quite rightly in the comments that Kyle Walker, is he a slept-on asset because he's played so many 90 minutes this season? Should he be in people's teams, or can he also come into the Pep Roulette selection wheel? What do you think?
I think it's always a concern with Pep, particularly around European football. The thing is, we only have Kevin De Bruyne ruled out of this game because of injury. So he has a full complement of players at his disposal. And that's always, for me, if I'm going to splash out on premium players, then that's going to be a worry, because if I'm spending top dollar, I want guarantees. I don't want a 75 to 85%. I want a 90, 95. I want him to know that he's in there. And yes, Kyle Walker is one of those players who you'd look at and go, right, well, he's going to be locked in. But even just in the back of my head, there's just that niggling thinking it's Pep. And I would always default to Edison. If I was looking for clean sheets and I'm looking for somebody in that defensive back line, it would be Edison, even though we did see Stefan Ortega start for Manchester City after the international break. But look, I mean, Kyle Walker's is as good as any He's started in every game. He's played 9. He's played almost every minute that he was replaced and time added on, I think. So yes, but if he was dropped this weekend, following the return of Emmanuel Akanji in a slight formational tweak, would it surprise you? No.
Nothing. So again, nothing surprises you with Pep.
You go into these decisions around Manchester City with your eyes open, and I see you on the assumption. If for me, always look at Manchester City as a glass half empty, and then if it turns out to be half full, it's a bonus.
Yeah, I think the only certainties there is Ederson, Rodri, and Haaland, and you don't really want Rodri in your team. He's not much of a good FPL asset. So continuing over, the Manchester United Red Devils, obviously a difficult game, as we said, against Fulham. But is there injury news to boost the side, or do they still have some problems?
They've still got problems, and the return of Rafael Varane missed out midweek, but he has found himself on the bench as well in recent matches. But that said, Rafael Varane is available, so I do expect him to start. Question marks over Victor Lindelof may make the decision for Erik ten Hag a little bit easier. We also seen the return of Aaron Wan-Bissaka in midweek, but he spent a period out with a hamstring problem. So again, I think Diogo Dalot is locked in for now. Casemiro, he was returning from an ankle problem against Newcastle, suffered a setback. We're looking at several weeks on the sidelines, so that opens up a spot in midfield. There's a couple of ways that we can go with this. I've went with Christian Eriksen alongside Amrabat, but McTominay could easily drop in there with maybe Bruno moving centrally and Anthony on that right hand side. You could also bring in Garnacho and switch Marcus Rashford around as well. So there's a couple of ways we can go with this, but I'm leaning towards this starting lineup and probably won't look to change it ahead of that FPL deadline.
Continuing over to the best United in the Premier League, Newcastle. We talked about it. It's the derby between you and me for 1 week and maybe another week in the season. We won't be allies, we'll be enemies. But yeah, what is the news that maybe Arsenal fans need to be afraid of?
Well, Newcastle made 8 changes at Old Trafford on Wednesday night, which was a little bit of a concern pre-kickoff. And then we lost Matty Targett to a hamstring problem within the first couple of minutes during those opening exchanges. And you thought the writing was on the wall, but, you fast forward into like 85 minutes and it was a superb performance. In particular, you look at Tino Livramento, Lewis Hall, Emil Kraft, Paul Dummett, all of those players on the fringes of that starting 11, but they're just not quite there in terms of really pushing and competing for a start when we have everybody fit and healthy. So I'm going with this. Joe Linton is the one that you'd look at and think he's just returned from injury, and maybe he's a player that's could be rested, but not for this one. Again, I don't see Longstaff. I think he'll be absolutely fine. He's one of the runners of the team. Isaac, he won't be back before the international break, which means that Callum Wilson should hopefully, certainly in the Premier League anyway, get the green light to lead that Magpies attack.
And we have seen Fabian Schär flagged in FPL. A lot of people sent messages about that on the Athletic too, but also on here. What is the reasons for that?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't involved against Manchester United and never was going to be. I hasten to add. He was feeling a little bit under the weather. Nothing too serious. I think Eddie Howe was a little bit coy in terms of the information that he presented, but I'm certainly not expecting Fabian Schär to miss out. I'd be very, 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 very surprised if he did. So I think he starts all day long alongside Jamal Lascelles.
There you go. So pretty almost the perfect team there for Newcastle versus Arsenal. In fact, before we move on to Nottingham Forest, what's your scoreline prediction for it then?
Look, I'm expecting a really tough game. the expectation levels on Tyneside are a lot higher than they have been in previous fixtures against Arsenal. There's definitely a feel-good factor. I want to see a draw and sit on the fence, but I'm not going to, because that is the boring thing to do. I'm going to see a 3-1 Newcastle.
Oh, see, I'm going to go 0-0. See, that's what I think. But obviously, I back my boys, but I just think you'll just kind of block us out like you did last year. You know, you don't want to lose at home, and it's a big statement again if you manage to get a draw with Arsenal. Ricardo says, "Do you think Willock?"
Walcott.
Yeah, he's retired. He doesn't even play anymore. Do you think Willock can come in to the 11, maybe onto the right?
Joe Willock's been fantastic performances, energy levels, athleticism, direct, certainly gives us a different avenue. I think we're still at the stage where maybe better to make an impact from the bench, from suffering that long-term injury back end of May, hamstring and then Achilles. He spent a lot of time out. So for that reason, I don't have Joe Willock starting just yet. But look, his performances have been fantastic, and he certainly isn't too far away. It may require a little bit of a tweak from Eddie Howe in terms of his formation, because I don't think he will drop Longstaff. I don't think he'll drop Guimaraes or Joe Linton. So maybe could be an Almiron and maybe go with a 4-2-3-1 if you're going to deploy Joe Willock. But like I say, certainly for this game, I just think it's a game too soon.
Nottingham Forest up next. What is the latest for them?
I do have Ty Owomni, the leading scorer, back in that starting 11. Big question marks over the fitness of the striker. This is an ongoing groin problem that needs to be managed. Steve Cooper said he wouldn't go into the details. It sounds as if there's a bit of a hernia issue, a bit of an underlying problem, and we quite often see this where players are able to manage it to an extent. They have good days and bad days. So whether he's available or not, we can't be 100% certain. And again, I've learned to sort of take things that Steve Cooper said with a pinch of salt. But I understand that a woman may, need surgery at some point down the line. For me, if he's fit enough to be in the squad, then he's fit enough to start, and it's worth taking that risk. So that's why I have him back in there, because Forest have been the draw specialists this season, and they need to convert some of those, those tight games and convert those into narrow wins to get them away from that drop zone.
So continuing over, Sheffield United, one that there's not a lot of interest in again. Do you want to quickly canter through?
Yeah, not much to say on this one. A little bit too soon for Ollie McBurney, and also I'm just going to Ahmed Dhodozic, which means that the Blades will probably go with a back four again, given that they've got so many injuries in that defence. Typically, we would see the 3-5-2, so maybe a 4-4-2 again with Ryan Brewster given another opportunity, but this time alongside Cameron Archer, to see if they can score some goals and get a win on the board.
So Spurs are here. I think, if I remember, there was a question about them a little bit earlier. Oh yes, Maddison not training. If there's any truth to that, Ben, what is your kind of thoughts and feelings?
As always, when these things crop up, I will take pictures from training grounds, whether those still or video images, with a pinch of salt. And of course, because you never quite know what's going on, you're looking at a single snapshot in time, and also then you don't know if things are going on which have been agreed. There could be individual sessions where that Maddison has had problems in the past, could be working on in the gym. To further complicate matters, there are still another 2 training sessions to go before, Monday night. So as far as I'm concerned, unless it's been a little bit of an illness or there's been a bit of a setback, then it's pretty much as you were. And even if it was, like I say, something minor, then he has a chance of recovering anyway.
Yeah. And so with the rest of the team, it's pretty much the full fitness for Spurs, isn't it?
Apart from the left back, that's the only place that's really up for grabs. Undugi was forced off against Fulham back in game week 9. That was a minor muscle issue. We've seen Ben Davies come in last time out. He was forced off. He's been carrying a bit of an ankle problem. It looks as if he's going to miss out. Emerson Royale came in, swapped flanks. And like I say, we're playing the percentages here. He's the only one that we know or we can sort of guarantee at this point is going to be 100% fit. So that's why I have him starting.
And we've also seen the surprise return of Rodrigo Bentancur as well, much earlier than one would expect from his injury. Do you think that he'll be conservatively managed over the next few weeks and months so that he can then start maybe pushing for a place when Basuma and Sarr go off to the AFCON Cup just in the new year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm working off the top of my head. I think we're looking around about that maybe 255, 260 days on the sidelines. So there is a little bit of caution, and the protocols do need to be adhered to. But the fact that he has been working hard on the training pitches and he was included in the matchday squad is a huge boost for both him and Tottenham and Postecoglou. So that's great news in that regard. But Tottenham are in that fortunate position and Ange's that where they don't need to take any unnecessary risks. They're getting results. They're top of the league, and of course Basuma and Pape Sarr, they're both playing excellent in that double pivot.
Yes, so it's probably a good time for him to make his way back into the squad, as you like to say, treat with kid gloves, or is it tret? I don't know, how do you say?
Tret.
He would treat.
No, you got to treat him in kid gloves.
Okay.
Kid gloves.
There you go. West Ham up next. Again, you did some interesting analysis on them this week. Really heavy reliance on Bowen and his goal output here. I still don't know what's up with Danny Ings, because Mikel Antonio is just a shadow of his former self. But yeah, you've gone with this lineup today. Reasons for it? Was it any injury news, or do you think that the team needs a bit of a kind of jig about because of the fact that they've been so inconsistent?
Well, Paquetá and Alvarez are both suspended. So that opens the doors for Kudus, Mohamed Kudus. He's been impressed on the training pitches, got himself a couple of goals in games, scored midweek. So I think he deserves that opportunity. Ben Rama would be the obvious choice on that left-hand side to also come in. Kurt Zouma, there's question marks over him. And I'm debating and toying with maybe putting Dino Mavropanos, ex-Gunner, in that back line. That could be the switch there. Zuma hasn't trained fully with the squad. So like I say, there are serious doubts and concerns over him. Emerson returned from suspension midweek. And immediately David Moyes brought the Italian back in at the expense of Aaron Cresswell, who seems to have fell way down the pecking order and is bang out of favour.
So the last team of this week, the last team as usual, it is Wolves.
Yeah, played really well against Newcastle, a little bit unfortunate. And certainly with the penalty, I'll hold my hands up. There's no rose-tinted glasses here. And I think Gary O'Neill alluded to the fact that Wolves have now had 3 referees suspended or downgraded following poor decisions against his team this season already, and that was another one. It was questionable, but they played really well. I thought Pedro Neto was excellent on the night, but we've seen that common non-contact hamstring injury. The sniper looked like he got shot. They're talking about a few weeks, or certainly the player is. I'd be very surprised if it was a few weeks. That was a 4 to 6 week when I initially seen it, and that would maybe, we could be looking at back end of November for that at very best, or maybe creeping into December. So yeah, that would mean open the door for Lamina and Traore to keep his place with João Gomez coming back in and on the right hand side. Like I said, I've been impressed with Gary O'Neill and Wolves. They've had a really good season and surprising a few people.
Yes, I'm enjoying it. I hope he does well there, especially as maybe a message to Bournemouth for doubting the brilliance of Gary O'Neill. But nobody doubts your brilliance, Ben. You've been fantastic as always. Great to speak to you. Do remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it as well. And we will be back again next week with the latest round of news. But for now, we're going to wish you the best of luck, the best of health. If you need to catch up with anything, head over to the Premier Injuries website. You can also message Ben on Twitter. You can message me on Twitter, and we will try and answer your messages as quickly